Well, thank you. Is this mic gonna be okay? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Not too big of a room, so, I'd like to welcome you all this evening and especially my friends and family that probably take up a good percentage of the room. But thank you all. Also, the Valley Bookstores, has been very good at promoting my book and actually keeping it on the shelves because a lot of bookstores, you don't always find it in the store, but Valley Bookstores has been keeping it on the shelf. So thank you for Valley Bookstore. I'm going to give you just a little bit of a background of my previous law enforcement. Before coming to Washington County Sheriff's Office, I brought with 3 years of law enforcement experience. It started with a department called Fridley Police Department. You probably have heard it, maybe you know where it is. I was a police fire radio dispatcher for about 2 years with Fridley Police. My first sworn position with law enforcement took place in a small town called Hilltop. Now, I don't know if you know where Hilltop is, but Hilltop is in northeast Minneapolis, surrounded by Columbia Heights in Anoka County. Hilltop population is probably only 1,500, and it contained 2 shopping centers, pretty large trailer park, apartments, some houses, and believe it or not, the crime rate is probably more than my next department that I went to. But so I was there for about a year at Hilltop, and I next went to the city of Kenyon, which Kenyon is in southern Minnesota, Goodhue County. It's about 14 miles east of Faribault. I was a police officer there for 1 year and patrolled the streets of Hilltop. Hilltop had a police chief, had a 2 full-time officers and a couple of part-time officers. So I did bring experience coming into Washington County. Now, in 1974, I came to Stillwater, Washington County, and walked into the historic courthouse. So I did work in the historic courthouse, was sworn in as a deputy sheriff, and in January of 2024, coming up next year, it will have been 50 years since I walked into the historic courthouse. So, long time. So working at the historic courthouse, I see it's having a facelift now. So I guess you can't actually go for a tour, but it's under doing a facelift for it, and worked most of the areas in the sheriff's department, such as dispatch, jail, patrol, even worked some civil processing and subpoenas. But moving from a police department to a sheriff's department was a little bit different because you had your own jail there. And I know that there are some here that worked in the Washington County Historic Courthouse, but I'm only just scratching the surface of some of the stories that took place back when we worked there. The jail was outdated the day I came to Washington County. And there were occasions that over the weekend, we would have so many prisoners that they were sleeping on the floor, sleeping on the picnic tables, and made for a real difficult time when you made arrest in the historic courthouse. Well aware. And we had people that may have been coming off of work as an executive at some place in Maplewood or Oakdale, and they get arrested. And the next thing you know, they are coming to Washington County Jail thinking they're going to get their own cell block. Or they're not.
They got their own 15.
So that was kind of disheartening, and I know that a lot of the inmates weren't happy about that. So, the historic courthouse, it was a fun place to work in because, first of all, we were the only ones there. The sheriff's department was actually the last department to move to the second department I worked at, Washington County Sheriff's Office, which was in the courthouse, the current courthouse in Stillwater. But anyways, the last department to move, other than the courts, we had some courts, and I think they used the courts when we had a prisoner housed in jail for arraignments upstairs for the courtrooms and such. But I was only in the courthouse, the historic courthouse, for about 1 year, maybe 14 or 15 months. And today's standards, when somebody starts with a new department, a new recruit, they're usually on probation for 3, 6 months, maybe a year. And they were also issued a field training officer. Well, my field training officer, FTO, was a man by the name of Chief Deputy Bob Bell. And very nice man. He took very good control over the front counter as you came into the sheriff's office. And behind the counter was dispatch. So you could actually come in to the courthouse, the historic sheriff's office, and you could talk to Chief Deputy Bob Bell, and you could see the dispatchers right there. Now, I don't even know where they are. They're up somewhere in the law enforcement center. But, and so the first couple of days of my field training officer with Chief Deputy Bell was with the policies and procedures, different memorandums, and learning the employees and the where the departments were before they moved to the new courthouse. I did that for 2 days. And then on the third day, I had an assignment to do, and I was kind of excited about it. The excitement was, I'm taking a squad car and I'm driving to St. Paul. Now, mind you, I'm from Northeast Minneapolis, or what we call Northeast Minneapolis. And I knew Minneapolis much better than St. Paul. But so I got the address, the name, and the place I was going was Uniforms Unlimited. Back then, that's where we all got our uniforms. And so Chief Deputy gave me a set of car keys and says, just take squad 116. 116. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. And then he gave me directions. So I go out to the parking lot to look for 116. Well, it just so happens that there was a black and white squad, a blue and white squad, and the rest were all brown squads. And I thought, brown squads, that makes sense for a squad car. So I'm circling the parking lot and not finding squad 116. Chief Deputy Bell calls out to me, Larry, it's a black and white squad car right over there. And I'm like, oh, okay, I see it. But what I didn't realize was that municipalities back then would contract with the sheriff's office for policing. So the black and white squad car that I was going to drive, 116, was from Afton, Lakeland Shores, St. Mary's Point, because back then they had their own police department back then. The blue and white squad car was from Matamidi, Birchwood, Willarney, Delwood, and so that squad came from that area because they contracted for police services with Washington County. So anyways, I did find my way to Uniforms Unlimited. I got my uniforms, my gun belt, my leather. Back then we had brown leather. Today they have black leather. And the one half moon patch there is actually the patch that we wore back then, Washington County Sheriff's Department instead of office. So I was through 3 days of FTO training with Chief Deputy Bob Bell. I came back from St. Paul in plain clothes And he said, I want you to start the next 2 days working in uniform. You're gonna be working with a deputy by the name of Smiley Burnett. I said, great, you know, so I came in the following day and in uniform, I was really proud of the uniform, you know. And the next thing I know, I meet Smiley Burnett, and Smiley Burnett was in charge of our civil process division. And to be real honest with you, I really didn't know what civil process was other than subpoenas. I knew that. So anyways, so I worked with him for 2 days. It was twofold, basically, to learn a little bit about civil process. But most importantly, I was learning about Washington County. Washington County is like 40 miles long, 10 miles wide. And the main thing that Smiley Burnett said was, once you find Manning Avenue, everything is Manning Avenue goes from Scandia all the way down to Cottage Grove or Denmark Township. So find that road and you'll be doing just fine. So that's what I did. We traveled the county the last 2 days. One day we traveled north, the next day we traveled south. Learned a little bit about civil process. And so my parting words with my FTO, my field training officer with Chief Deputy Bob Bell, was that the Sheriff's Department was going to be moving within a year to our new quarters in the courthouse, the existing courthouse now. It sounds confusing, but the Sheriff's Office actually was housed in the courthouse that we have now in Stillwater. The jail was there, civil process, patrol, investigation. And so that's where we were going. And he was very firm about that. Within the next year, maybe a year and a half, that's where you're going to be going. I was kind of excited about seeing a new sheriff's office. Well, he also told me, the chief deputy, that this was my last day of FTO training, which was 5 days. Most police officers are, 6 months, but I must have been a quick learner. I don't know. But so he said also, now one thing about Stillwater, I didn't know that much about it. I didn't even know about a lift bridge in Stillwater. In the summertime on weekends, avoid Stillwater, in the summertime, because the lift bridge, there's boats going up and down the river, and you'll get jammed in the traffic and you'll never be able to get through town. So I'm like, okay, good advice. And he says, just so you know, they're in the planning stages, 1974. They're in the planning stages to build a brand new bridge crossing Stillwater. And I'm like, so I looked at the date. Well, the St. Croix Crossing Bridge opened 2017. Few years. So just a couple of quick fun facts about the historic courthouse. And I enjoyed working there. I think everybody did. There were a lot of good professional people. We had a 2-deputy squad car that worked north. And that was nice because I started off working the north area and I was working with somebody else, which would help. And that's where the name Corncob Jungle came from. That's in the book. And for those of you that haven't read it, it was like, you're working in a corncob jungle because, all the agriculture and the farms and everything. But then you go south of 94, there's population down there, but north was the corncob jungle to us. So that's the way we referenced it. Also, a couple other facts is the Oasis Cafe. Everybody knows where that is. If you haven't had a breakfast there, go patronize the Oasis. The Oasis Cafe also had a gas pump there. A couple gas pumps, and after we filled up the squad cars, so after our shift at between 4 and 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning, we would go fill up with gas. And the people that you meet overnight in restaurants, sometimes they're not all that much fun. They're kind of cross-eyed and they just but we went in there and occasionally would have a breakfast, but so that's where we filled up with fuel. Another interesting fact, I was sworn in as a deputy sheriff by Sheriff Ed Westfall. Ed Westfall lived in Oakdale, and he was either Oakdale or Lake Elmo near the border, but he was the first sheriff not to reside in the historic courthouse. So that was something kind of new, because overall, a lot of sheriffs live right at the courthouse. Well, that's years ago. The previous sheriff by the name of Rube Grandquist, who I met once, his family lived at the historic courthouse. They actually had a residence there. And the wife actually participated in making some of the meals for the inmates. It was kind of a family situation. And that's how things kind of worked back then. And fun experience. If you tour it, I hope it's not my name, it could be, but I was pretty new on the department. But you look into some of the jail cells, and there's a couple of names that are familiar, like Wally Abramson, who used to be the police chief in Stillwater. His name is etched in some of the cell blocks there, so apparently he was very popular back then. So about 75, sometime in early 75, we moved to the courthouse, the existing courthouse now with the sheriff's department. That would be the jail, all of the divisions, patrol, investigation, and communication. And we moved to a state-of-the-art building. It's very nice. The jail was a lot larger than the jail in the historic courthouse. We actually had like 2 jailers instead of 1. We had 2 communication operators, dispatchers. We had multiple investigators, patrol, division, and the assignments remained the same. We had a North Squad that worked, a 2 deputy North Squad that worked the north half of the county, a little bit further north. And then we had a squad assigned, 1 deputy squad assigned for the middle, another deputy assigned to the south part. And so it was going really quite well. The deputies, there was 2 deputies that came on at 7 o'clock and were off at 3 o'clock. We call them the power shift, and that's the busiest time in most agencies. So they worked 7 to 3, but they got off at 3 o'clock. And the night shift where we worked on the night shift was 11 to 7. And so we were off at 7 o'clock in the morning, but after 3 o'clock in the morning, we were the only squad in Washington County. Not the only police squad, but we were the only sheriff's squad in Washington County, unless it was a contract area. And so what they had us do is that the 2 deputy squad would pull down into the middle of the county, Highway 36, Highway 96, maybe the Interstate 94, back then it was called Highway 12. But that's the area that they wanted us to be in. So if there were calls, we could jump into squad 116. By the way, it was the fastest squad. Everybody wanted to drive it. And so you had to be careful, because that squad could get away from you rather quickly. But it was a fast squad. But we were assigned in the central area, so we could be dispatched to northern parts, the middle, what have you, in the county, and have a quicker response time. So we were very happy about the new courthouse and sheriff's office. And I think the courts also were pretty happy about it as well, because to have all of these deputies that had guns and so forth downstairs, and if they needed a armed officer, a deputy, 1 call would bring multiple deputies up to the courtroom. And believe it or not, they had issues in the courtroom. Today they have court security, they have bailiffs, and they have people that do carry a firearm. But actually, they did call upon the sheriff's office when there was a situation that would arise up in the courts. The dispatch center was state of the art, and we were trained all of the deputies were trained into working dispatch as well as the jail, because you never know when you might have to fill a position in another part of the sheriff's office. Well, of course, at night when I was working, the front office was closed, but the jail was 24/7, and so was dispatch. And what was happening, and what was the first thing that we realized, is that there was a staffing shortage in patrol. And so what was happening is somebody would call in sick or have vacation in the jail. And so what we would have to do is we would have to volunteer or be assigned in the jail. Some people like to work the jail. Most of the deputies did not want to work the jail. They wanted to be out in the road, you know. But so when there was a shortage in the jail, we had to assign 1 or 2 deputies to work the jail. Same way with communication. We might have a communication operator that's on vacation, and we had to fill in the communication, fill in dispatch. So what was happening after 3 o'clock was a little bit unbelievable in that there were times when there were only like 2 deputies assigned for patrol, and we were told to park the car on back then it would have been the east side of the sheriff's office, and any calls that you get, one of you got to go take that call. So we virtually have no squad cars on the road. That's the honest truth. And so that was at 3 o'clock. Like 3 o'clock to 7 in the morning was always pretty quiet, fortunately. It was a corncob jungle. You know, the rest of the departments, Woodbury, Oakdale, Cottage Grove, St. Paul Park, Newport, they all had their policing around the clock for the most part. But the sheriff's office, for whatever reasons, we needed more patrol officers. So anyways, I remember 2 nights that there was myself, and if we didn't have a shift commander, sergeant, then the senior deputy would be in charge, which we were always fearful. We always looked at who's the senior deputy tonight, because you know, if it's gonna go, something's gonna go wrong, you know, who's gonna get blamed is that senior deputy, like somebody with only like 3 years of experience. So, but we had 2 deputies. One was a deputy by the name of Jay Kimball. Some of you might know him. I think at one time he might have been a mayor or a city council here in Stillwater. He and I were dispatching. We were good. We had the squad car pulled up to the back door. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I took a call of a suspicious vehicle or suspicious person around the areas of Stillwater Township. Jay went and took that one, no problem, person's already gone or whatever. He came back. I took another call of the milk truck going off the road in Withrow and doing some damage to a stop sign. So I said, Jay, I'll take that one. You know, so I jumped in the squad car, went out there. I talked with the guy, did the accident report. He says, you sound a lot like the dispatcher. We all saw that. So I came back. That was it for the calls. But that's kind of scary to have that situation. But you know, back then, bear in mind, back then we didn't have a 911 dispatch system. This were all calling directly to the sheriff's office. It wasn't until a few years later that they implemented the 911 dispatch system. So, so then I was promoted to sergeant in 1976. And probably I was like the youngest sergeant, because when I got reassigned to investigation, they keep telling me that you don't know anything because I'm the youngest sergeant, you know, I was assigned to investigation. But back in 1977 I was reassigned from patrol sergeant to investigation. And that's where I did the lion's share of the child abuse investigations. Back then, the investigation unit was called the Felony Investigation Unit. Mainly, we're investigating felony crimes. And what we did back then is each detective would be assigned an area of the county. So we had a detective who was assigned Forest Lake Township, Scandia Township, by the name of Detective Bob Eller. I initially was assigned Hugo, Main Township, and because they didn't have too much activities, they kind of felt sorry for me, I think, you know. So I was assigned, we all had team home squad cars, we all had pagers. And so then we had deputies assigned to the central part. We had two detectives assigned to Cottage Grove, Newport, St. Paul Park. And it was a team, two detectives. And so it was working quite well. The only problem we had is the room that we had for investigations was probably about half the size of this room here. And we had 12 or 13 detectives, and we had to share desks and share telephones. So if all of a sudden you get a phone call and it's for Detective Eller, you know, he may have to run to find an open desk and an open phone and hit *7 or what you have to do and then talk, you know. So that was an issue. But it wasn't soon after that they had different assignments for detectives, such as a welfare fraud detective. We had a unit that did welfare fraud. And they also looked at assigning a full-time detective in child abuse investigations. Well, and they were looking for volunteers, and of the 12 or 13 of the detectives are looking around, you know, who's youngest in seniority, you know, like, you know, here I am. But I took it, you know, very with a grain of salt, but I took it seriously. And I was trained in by a couple of good detectives. Bob Eller did child abuse investigations, and he also did investigations when I got swamped or I was on vacation. We had another detective by the name of Ted Chrysler from the Forest Lake area, who was also a detective who did child abuse investigation and a backup and a very good trainer. So that's what happened. So starting working full-time child abuse investigations, it was challenging. However, there was some accomplishments that over the years that you look back at, you know. And I'm going to move on just a little bit to during the time I was a detective doing child abuse. I continued that when we moved to the law enforcement center, which is the existing sheriff's office today in Stillwater. And it come to all of our attention doing child abuse, child protection, the prosecution, and the law enforcement, that we needed to look individually at a lot of cases. So what we developed is a team approach to child abuse investigations. Every Tuesday afternoon, unless we had no cases, every Tuesday afternoon we had a meeting. There was a child protection supervisor. I was there, usually a prosecutor, and if whoever referred the case to child protection or to law enforcement, their case was presented at this child abuse team, and we made some decisions that were very beneficial to victims. And it was come to be pretty much a statewide program for other counties to take under and do the team approach to investigating child abuse. It's the way it works best. So we did that, and somewhere between 1979, 1980-ish, somewhere around that, we actually looked at a statewide level of educating law enforcement. And I became a part of that organization for 10 years. I was a contract instructor for the BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And we went around the state 10 years, we usually did certain times of the years, but we've been to multiple cities like Thief River Falls, Worthington, all of these Mankato, in the cities, and we taught law enforcement what we believe would be the best approach to investigate child abuse. We had prosecutors that were in the class teaching. We had child protection teaching law enforcement. We had doctors and therapists. And I think we did a real good job teaching law enforcement. So if they're at that point where they need to take a report, child abuse in their jurisdiction, at least they can have an idea what they should be looking for. So I did that for 10 years on a part-time basis, contract officer. And in 1995, now we moved into the law enforcement center, and it was beyond imagination, even going from the state-of-the-art sheriff's office that we had, that we were outgrowing, the jail, the communications, the investigation division was just unbelievable. I go into the law enforcement center today and I just can't believe it. Of course, it's hard to find that front counter because you got to go through all these glass entrances. You probably got to go through a metal detector and everything else. But so I served under Jim Frank, the sheriff at the law enforcement center until 2000 when I retired, and I did child abuse investigations for a couple years in the law enforcement center. And then I was assigned to the Office of Conduct and Standards, which basically is internal affairs and background investigations. I was a supervisor of that office. It was newly created, and I felt pretty proud of the way we treated complaints against officers. Today, I don't know what they do today because it's got to be a difficult job for law enforcement in the things that you see on TV. But so I did that for 5 years. I also had the opportunity, I didn't really want to go in this direction, but for 5 years on a part-time basis, I was in charge of our water recovery unit, which we call the dive team. I'm a certified advanced scuba diver, and we started a program. We actually had volunteers, about 10 volunteers that we put on the dive team, and then we had deputy dive team members of about 4 or 5. But we had the distinction of going and recovering evidence. Water recovery, I mean, it was just unbelievable because it started off very slow, and some of the volunteers were saying, is this it? You know, we had training every month. We did an open water every month. We did open waters in Square Lake during the winter. We're just diving in the winter, you know, and we're, you know, to the point where some days our apparatus would freeze up, so we don't cancel it. I'm not doing it today, but, and so the first couple years, our volunteers were kind of getting bored, and I said, give it time. We're gonna have time, and we're gonna be called out. We're gonna have some water recovery events that you'll remember. After 2 years, we had 1 year that we recovered probably 4 or 5 vehicles that were in the water. St. Croix River, we recovered many. Great Cloud Island, which nobody knew what Great Cloud Island was. Great Cloud Island on the river, we covered a vehicle, lots of evidence. And as a matter of fact, in 1 week's time, maybe it was 2 weeks, but I was dispatched as a water recovery supervisor. We had to have a trailer. You might have seen the trailer if you attended Washington County Fairgrounds. That same trailer that we use for the dive team is out there on the fairgrounds. And one of the cases that we were responsible for, we had a plane crash in the Mississippi River of the Newport St. Paul Park area, where 3 people perished and 2 people survived. There was a plane that left St. Paul Airport. The wing hit a tree, went right down into the river. And we had to call the barge out to pull the airplane out of the river. And so the divers were kind of enthusiastic about that, not so much for the bodies. A week later, we had a plane. It was a mother and son the mother was the pilot, left the airport in Blaine, it would be the Anoka Airport, and had a heart attack. And it was a situation where this plane was flying over the metro area and nobody knew where it was going to land, and they're trying to talk with, they did manage to talk with the son. The son had some issues, never flown a plane or anything. But what happened was it flew until all of a sudden it crashed down on White Bear Lake. And so we lost 2 souls in White Bear in that plane crash. That was like the week following. So we were there all night, recovered the plane, and brought it up on shore, waited for the medical examiner. And so we were busy in the water recovery unit. And a little spoiler alert is that book 1 has a chapter in it that is inspired by the water recovery team. And I think you'll really enjoy that part of the book. So retirement, post-retirement, I want to leave some time for questions. So I retired in 2000. I retired on my birthday, May 25th in 2000. And I didn't think there'd be that many people. You know, it was Memorial Weekend. And I thought, you know, how many people are going to come have a piece of cake and coffee? The room was about this big, but it was filled. I had judges, I had the county attorney, I had a lot of social workers telling stories. We also had plans for a river cruise, retirement river cruise on the paddle wheel. So I thought most people would choose that, but it was a good turnout. I was really honored to be there to hear some good feedback from some of the social workers and law enforcement. So we retired. My wife Denise was unable to attend due to some circumstances beyond her control. And so we retired. She worked at a behavioral health clinic. She was getting very tired of that. I worked a little bit at a place called Treasure Island Resort and Casino. And I had one of the best jobs there. I was in surveillance operations, and I could watching people. I learned how to card count. So it was a fun job. And the buffet that we had for the employees called the Oasis, interestingly enough. My wife Denise said, "You're gonna have to cut down on the buffet." I think I gained about 35 pounds. So, but after that, after 9/11, we found out about 9/11, like most of you did. Some of the people here probably don't even know what 9/11 is, but 9/11, I was working and doing surveillance at Treasure Island Resort and Casino. Denise called me from the Health Partners Clinic and said, "I think we're under attack." I says, "What do you mean we're under attack?" He says, "Yeah, there's a plane that just flew into the Twin Towers." And I'm thinking, must be a tour plane, who knows what. So I told this, called down and told the high stakes to put it closed captioned, and I put all the TV screens on so we could watch what was happening. Lo and behold, the second plane went right in. So after that, my wife and I decided, you know what, life's too short. So we both quit our jobs and we bought a motorhome. Some people could not believe it, that we sold our townhome in Woodbury, very nice one-level townhome that we were planning on living for years out our retirement. We sold that, bought a 35-foot motorhome and traveled south in the winter from California to Florida. And then in the summer, we worked at a houseboat resort in Crane Lake. And so what we did is, I mean, it was really an ideal job. We worked there, we only gonna work there for a couple of years. We worked there for 12 years. And that's how much fun it was. But we lived in a cabin, a remote cabin in, northern US and the Canadian border. It was on a lake called Namakan Lake. The remote cabin had a generator, but not a lot of amenities. But Denise drove to work in a 20-foot Crestliner. I call it pink, but I think it's a Crestliner burgundy or something they call it, but it looked like a pink boat to me. But she drove 45 minutes by boat to Crane Lake, through some rough waters and a lot of rocks to go to work. And I remained at the cabin and I did service calls. And believe it or not, houseboats require service calls, whether it's refrigeration, heating, water pumps. If you've ever been on in a motorhome, and things go wrong, and motorhomes are very similar to houseboats. So, and on an average year, I would put on on an average shift driving during the July month, which is the busiest, I would put on 170 miles on the water. Voyageurs National Park takes in Lake Cabotogama, Namakin, our favorite lake, that's where the cabin is, Sandpoint Lake, Crane Lake. And so we were busy and we enjoyed it. But at a certain point, we kind of thought, you know what, let's give that up. I got tired of carrying deep cycle batteries and propane tanks. So we left Voyager Lodge and Houseboat. We still are friends with the owners, previous owners actually, and we travel more. So that's what we've been doing, traveling more in the winter time. Just another little for fun facts is that in our travels, we meet a lot of people in Florida, Arizona, some in California. We've only spent some time in California, some in Texas, but we met a good friend who was a cattle rancher in Arizona. Her name is Sydney Spencer, and she has a small ranch in southern Arizona, actually about 3 miles from the Mexican border, which has some stories. We might put together a book sometime in the future about the times at the Lazy J Ranch in it's in the San Rafael Valley. That's where it is, and so we enjoy that. She has a small ranch in Arizona, 7,000 acres, and if you don't know the ranch, the areas and the different roads we take on the ranch, and at night you're going to get lost, and you don't always get cell phone coverage. So that's pretty much what we did, cattle ranch. And I'm going to finish up here just with a closing final statement about what you can expect from me in the future. And hopefully it'll be an additional book. So the Bridge Over Troubled Water was not only inspired by Washington County investigations, it was motivated by the history of the beautiful St. Croix Valley, the river, the community, the various historic houses, buildings, the Arcola Railroad High Bridge built in 1911. I think some of you know where that is, probably. Don't visit there, please. We're from the water. I don't want to catch anybody climbing up on top of the bridge. It's dangerous. And the government buildings such as a historic courthouse built in the 1870s. Finally, my incredible colleagues, the judges, the county attorneys, the doctors, therapists, court services, correctional officers, law enforcement, and notably child protection. We learned that a coordinated team effort would be the most effective. However, the functions of child protection and criminal investigations are distinct and separate. Law enforcement, human services, and prosecutors need to recognize their appropriate role distinctions, blending their divisions into a coordinated team of professionals. We found that was needed and we implemented. And I think today probably there are a lot of team approaches to child abuse. I know I was involved with, in Minneapolis, I submitted some of my outlines from the BCA teaching to a place called Corner House, where they do some very in-depth interviews of children there. In fact, I interviewed children there myself. So that was the approach that we used and we thought it worked really well. My first book, Bridge Over Troubled Water, has crime, suspense, adventure, and a wink of romance. My wife Lee says it's not even clearly romance, but it's her own opinion. However, the readers will walk in the shoes of a detective and look into the eyes of child victims and criminals, which will give you an aperture into what we do every day. In my 17 years as a Washington County detective, I've interviewed over 500 suspects accused of child abuse and over 700 victims of child abuse. I have never lost my dedication to the cause of child victims, reflected in the Detective Jack Jansen series. My years of law enforcement and child abuse investigations would not have been possible without the support of child protection and, of course, my wife Denise. Thank you both. I'm also pleased to announce that a second book is currently underway. Hopefully will be released in 2024. Covenant Publishing has already indicated they would love to have it as soon as possible. Believe it or not, writing a book is almost easier than doing programs and doing all of the promotion, because I'm losing important writing time. So anyways, the second book currently is underway and hopefully will be released in 2024. Detective Jack Jansen series continues as he is lured back to the sheriff's office after 10 months of retirement. The first detective in a newly created special victims unit is confronted with a single child sexual assault with a lone suspect and becomes entangled in the most victim interviews in one investigation during his entire career at the sheriff's office. It's a lot of interviews. The case contained immeasurable complexities that only a seasoned detective and compassionate child protection worker could comprehend, with an unimaginable and horrifying conclusion that leaves a small village shocked in the sound of silence. Thank you all for your support and attendance at this author event. It's my first author signing event, so I'm kind of new at this. And you may consider offering signed copies as holiday gifts. I'm gonna do a little question. We'll appreciate the effort and the thoughtfulness. That we have a few minutes for questions. I'll speak here longer if you have questions before you're available to purchase books. No questions. Okay, well, with that, I'll be around if you want to visit, ask questions, get a book signed, but you're more than welcome to purchase a book, or if you have a book that I'd be happy to sign. So thank you.
So I read the book and it was fascinating. Obviously you names were made up or whatever,
Yes.
but are all of the people in there people you knew pretty much? Or is that a secret that you can't really
No,
share?
it's the books, both books. This book is based on actual cases.
Okay.
Give you an example. Bert Bailey, at one time, that's in book one. I gotta remember which book I'm talking about. That's in book one. Bert Bailey is a man who is very known to me. I had arrested him twice. And he served his term in Stillwater Prison. And believe it or not, Bert Bailey, not the real name, Bert Bailey was written up in the Prison Mirror. Prison Mirror, for those of you who don't know it, it's the longest running newspaper in a prison. So, and they think it's in the whole US. This Prison Mirror has been writing articles and everything. They wrote an article about Bert Bailey, and Bert Bailey was about 85 years old. He was the oldest person in Stillwater Prison. But apparently the inmates got along with him. You know how sometimes you hear bad things about child abuse people being sentenced to Stillwater or Oak Park Correctional Facility. Bert Bailey got along well, but I arrested him twice. He became the oldest prison inmate in Stillwater. But so the names are very similar. I changed a lot of the names of the businesses because the Covenant Publishing said you should probably not write like about the Oasis or about Sunnyside Marina. So you make them look different because otherwise you might get into a situation where they might not be happy about where that leads in the book. If it's a good compliment about a business, they say you can write it. Well, you know, you never know. And so Club 36, you may recognize that. So right out here. And many of them, the names have been changed, and all of the names of the people in there, even the people at the sheriff's office, have been changed to similar names. So, but these cases are all very much the same cases I investigated. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, was this your first book that you've written, or have you written before?
This is my first book. I started writing a book about 5 years ago when we were on the road, the motorhome. And even though we did a lot of things in the motorhome, it was, it didn't get boring, but it got expensive. We're on vacation, you know, so what do? We go seeing all these sites, it starts adding up. So I thought, maybe if I write a book, I got a lot of stories in my head about experiences. I can write a book and maybe get it published. So I started writing a book about 5 years ago, got into about 8 or 9 chapters. It's very similar to book 1. I did change some of the direction of the way the book was going, but then I just kind of backed off on it. But here comes COVID. I got really bored watching TV, and I thought, I'm either going to finish this book or I'm throwing away all the things I kept, you know, for the writing. So I buckled down and I wrote the book, and it got published. So, but the names haven't changed. Yes.
You keep referring to book 1, or is this what you consider book 1?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Bridge Over Troubled Waters, my first book. And Colette's got a question. This is my granddaughter. How many books? Well, the first book I was thinking that the publishing part would be the easy part, you know, and everything. That's really not. It's so many times they send back chapters and you need to edit. So they go back and forth. So right now, our plan is to write 2 books. We already wrote 1 book. So the second book, if you picked it up, I wasn't even going to mention it, but we like, well, it's still not sure that we're going to keep it, but I think we're going to use Sound of Silence, like Bridge Over Troubled Water. Just have a connection. Sound of Silence. That book is going to be about child grooming. So that is halfway done, and something that I have cases about. And the third book, if there is a third book, which I think there's going to be, I already have all these books in my head. All I gotta do is put them in writing. The third book is going to be about Munchausen by proxy. And I had a couple of cases by Munchausen proxy, one of which received national news. It was written up in a magazine and so forth. So I'm going to have to write a book about Munchausen by proxy.
You get busy.
So yeah, but that's like 3 books. I think maybe we'll see how that goes and how the 3 books go. Any other questions?
Question.
Yes.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about child abuse cases?
The biggest misconception. Well, these are just going to my experience in investigating child abuse. And I think the biggest misconception is, you know, that children lie. They make false reports. 700, about 700, actually it's more than 700. I needed those stats for the BCA, was more than 700. I would say that there were probably less than 14 cases that I was able to establish were false reports. And a lot of times they involved divorce, you know, parents that went through a divorce. But when you think about all of the cases that we investigated, and we believe the kids, if the kids are telling us one story and they're believable, that's what we do. We just go forth with what we have. Of all the cases I investigated, most of the cases, the 500, were criminally charged in Washington County or other counties. Sometimes the cases would overlap into other counties, but all of the cases that were investigated, gone to trial, there was never one that was lost in court, which is probably an accomplishment for the county attorney in the case that was presented. So that's probably the biggest misconception, is that, you know, the people that are not being truthful, the victims. Now, as victims get older, there might be the chance that the victims might fabricate, but we verify and we check out the statements of the children, you know, so that's probably one of the misconceptions. Other questions? Yes.
The subject of child abuse is it's really heart-wrenching. How were you able to separate yourself from being too involved?
Okay, it's a difficult time. Basically, I had a line that I used, that was called, and I used it when I was teaching law enforcement. You're responsible for the effort, not the outcome. You're responsible for the effort, not the outcome. You go do the best job you can as a child abuse investigator, child protection worker, and you use your education, you use your experience, but use what your heart tells you to do. And that's what we did, and apparently it worked out quite well. But, you know, you got to have a good supporting spouse, you know, because there were times, you know, when there were actually times when you probably don't recall, but WCCO had an IT report, and there were cases that were coming in to child protection in the sheriff's office every day, 10, 12 cases. We couldn't keep up with them. And there was times that all of us thought, this is it. We can't do it anymore. We made it through that time. I was doing interviews. I would usually wait until we had an interview of the child victim. Usually the child victim was interviewed, shared interview between child protection worker and law enforcement. When we were so busy, I was taking reports from child protection, giving me reports, okay, this is the suspect. They live up in Forest Lake Township. And so I interviewed 2, sometimes 3 suspects a day. You know, that's too many, because you start overlapping, you know, some of the allegations. But we did that, and that was about the closest that it ever had to burning out. But it's tough, you just got to take it a day at a time and realize that you have a mission, and you don't forget the mission. It's the child victim. Is there another hand? Somebody else have a question? Yes.
Yeah, then to that point, do you feel like abuse has improved, or is it that it's just much more visible?
Very good question. Is it more visible? Has there been an increase in child abuse cases? I think there's more of an awareness. I just don't know. I don't think the COVID had a lot of additional victims, and I think COVID, maybe we lost a few victims during COVID, which would be really sad. But I just don't see it on the increase. It might increase with population, you know, the size, you know, larger departments may have more. But I think there's a lot of resources out there today. I think school teachers are talking more about, you know, abuse in the family. And it might be that it's more awareness in families and schools. So I guess I just think it's not increasing, at least I hope it's. So with that, why don't we break? And I appreciate everybody coming this evening. It's good to see a lot of friendly faces and friends. And so enjoy.